Welcome to Reality Bytes Radio on the 10th of September 2015, and delighted to welcome back Alan Watt to the show. You there, Alan?
Yeah, I'm here, yep.
Yep, loud and clear. Okay, I wrote a short email to you, as usual, and it was concerning how today's society perceives old society and old cultures. And I wondered if the TV and the movies are trying to portray certain cultures in a certain way, so as people can say, well, you know, they deserve it. That's what they're like. You know, they're they're savages, or they're backwards peoples, or whatever. I mean, I suppose I was watching Vikings, and in that they're just totally portrayed as brutal savages. Every one of them's a psychopath. I mean, there was one scene where the guy just gets up and chops somebody's legs off just because he's sitting the wrong way, and things like that. And I was thinking about Greece and how that's kind of transpired, and whether these types of societies, as they were in ancient times, the kind of warrior peoples, are being kind of goaded into reverting back to the way they were. Like, you see some of the riots in Greece, and they've got dustbin lids, trash can lids, and batons, and if you saw them from a distance, you'd think they were ancient warriors with a shield and a sword. In terms of the way society is portraying them now, it seems to be making these people out, and right across the board. It doesn't matter what historical drama you watch. The ordinary people are savages, basically.
Yes. Yeah. There's no doubt about it that the whole world, through the same international educational system and its various formats of indoctrinations, have been dumbing everybody down across the planet since since the days of John Dewey, where they talked about bringing in a rather kind of peasant-type society so that the elite could dominate and run the world, what they call properly, by experts and so on, has been going on for an awful long time. And you're seeing that this portrayal, always again through fictional movies and so on, has attracted to debase different cultures down to some low common denominator of primitive peasantry that needs expert rule, you see. And lots of folk who watch this stuff their whole life long will adopt those particular viewpoints as well on the cultures. I've heard people even in Scotland saying, oh yeah, there's too many people, and yeah, blah, 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 which is utter trite, because the population of Scotland really was around 5 million at that time. And a minority group is the Scots, and now they're almost gone altogether with the massive influx of European immigrants and African immigrants and so on. And so everything you see on TV and movies really is really it's lies, basically. It's propaganda, and it's really preparation and indoctrination as well, getting you ready for some other type of system being brought in. So but as I say, the average person who watches TV all their life will actually adopt the opinions that are given to them, and take the elite's point of view, even though they're basically working class people. I've heard their mouths too. Yeah.
In terms of that, I mean, I've never seen one of these kind of sword and sandal movies of old, and recent movies on the Romans being classed as barbarians. I've never seen one yet. They're always classed as the pinnacle of civilization, which fell apart because people got greedy and the too much sex and all the rest of it. But they're always portrayed as these noble warriors who went off and conquered places. I mean, it doesn't say they went off and slaughtered everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, that's standard again. And again, in the European history books, which again caters. Remember, education for ordinary folk was a much later development, really for the industrial era, because they had to get basic reading and writing and basic arithmetic and so on, so that people could work in the factories and sort of work and manage the factories. If it wasn't for that, probably they would never have given you basic education unless your parents could afford to bring in a private teacher or something. That's how Robert Burns was taught, but basically, they never wanted the people at the bottom to get any education at all. And once they did give them education, in Europe and Britain especially, as Britain wrote about it, they had big meetings of the nobility and the aristocracy worrying about taking down or reducing the work hours from 16 or 17 hours per day in the factories down to giving them a couple of hours extra for themselves, and the kind of mischief they might get up to if they started chatting to themselves, which could be compounded with problems for the elite's rule if you also give them a basic education where they could actually transmit what they'd read about life, history, and so on, and societies, and they might eventually rebel. So there's a tremendous problem right up into the 1900s about this particular problem of giving basic education to the peasants, and that's what how they framed it, basically, the commoners, and what effect it would have on a stable society. That's never really changed. And then you've got the other groups too, the communist groups, elements that came in as well, which really work towards the same goal of expert rule by an intelligentsia run in a scientific fashion for society. So it's the same agenda that's gone together. These two roads really merge into one with the same goals, and that's why you see it all working out today on all sides and all parties.
I suppose in America we've got the native Indians, as it were, portrayed as well, and uneducated, illiterate. But of course they had their own language. Just because they didn't speak English doesn't mean they're illiterate, you know.
That's right. And also too, the problem again across Europe was that it was standard for those who could afford education in universities and so on, and most folk could not. It was always an elitist thing. Was to be taught what's called classic history, which was based on Roman and Greek history, and they taught the Latin, they taught the Greek, in fact, up into the again about World War One, in most of these upper schools, and that's what they based their model of what civilization was. It was from the days of ancient Greece and so on. In fact, Asia and that they weren't mentioned at all in those teachings, and it was all Greek and Roman who brought civilization, especially the Roman part that took over from Greece, by conquering to unify what then was the ancient world. And that goal was always present amongst certain classes in the upper strata, of bringing in a world order again, you know, based on kind of Roman type order as well. And they always said that they went to civilize the world, didn't go to plunder it and to spread its tax base and so on and resources, and it was always to bring civilization. And you'll find with the empirical ages of the colonizers of Europe, different countries, they had the same format, they used the same excuses. They never told you that the big merchant bankers were running the countries already and using their armies to go and plunder, so that they and their own boys could get in there and get all the goods and raw resources and all the rest of it. So there's a tremendous hypocrisy in history, which was always covered in lies. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going back to when I was a child, we always watched the latest Western movies and all the rest of it. And again, even the kind of the shopkeepers in the little towns there were semi-illiterate themselves, and there was always kind of the head guy in the town, whether it was a sheriff or somebody else, some corporate entity, was always there to denigrate everybody and say that we need to do this, we need to do that, and you just mind your place, kind of thing. And that was always how it was portrayed in the movies. And again, later on, when the Indians were portrayed as alcoholics, savages, they were the ones doing all the scalping, and they deserved what was coming to them, which was, as you say, civilization. And that's what was portrayed. And if we bring it back into what's happening today in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, we see the same thing. This same game plan. Dehumanize the people that live there, even although you don't know who they are. You've never met them. You know nothing about them until you're told that they were, terrorists, and away you go.
Yeah, it's an old strategy again, very old strategy. But you always demonize the enemy regardless, and the Romans did the same thing until they had them civilized, and brought into the Roman Empire. Then they'd lift them up a bit to the extent in their history books. But you always call them barbarian, etc. even though the Romans themselves were very paganistic, had their own kinds of sacrifices too, and including sacrificing their own troops for king for the day and all that, for the Mars celebration. So it's amazing how the hypocrisy involved with those who get paid, the mercenaries who go off to get paid to civilize other countries for the big merchant bankers of the day. And ancient Rome had the same problem. Ancient Rome was run really, it doesn't matter who was the figurehead in power, he was dependent upon the loans that he got too to manage his big empire and the massive armies and all the rest of it. There's a lot of history involved in that. And they even had the merchant bankers, workers going off with the armies, and they managed all the payments, the weekly or monthly payments to the troops. They managed all the logistical supplies and all the rest of it, and all went down and carefully written down all the rest of what was owed. And the Caesar, whoever happened to be, the emperor would go off and he'd meet with the lenders of the day. Yeah. So nothing's really changed from then to the present time.
So when say people in Scandinavia watch a program like Vikings, they must have a better idea of their own history than the TV portrays. But do you think they actually take on some of the characteristics, or try to live up to those kind of characteristics that are portrayed on the television in the modern era?
The one country in the world where you'll see it emulated to an extent. I mean, remember, the whole culture idea is also fashion. It's fashion, music, and the whole culture industry, and the movies. And you'll see it's more prominent in the U.S., who actually, you'll see the whole during the 70s, it churned out these different Dukes of Hazzard and all these different things. The guys with the tailor-made jeans where their genitals were so crushed that you'd almost think that's what their Adam's apple happened to be. The tight pants, the tight shirt, and the big hats and all that, acting like cowboys with big V8 engine cars and running moonshine. That's the image that was portrayed. We're free and we're wild and watch us sort of idea. And so many Americans actually thought that all their ancestors were cowboys, which is nonsense, utter rubbish, because factory towns were taken from Europe by the same boys who ran them in Europe, and they sent them across the U.S., brought the immigrants in, shoved them into different mining towns and so on, factory towns, gave them the tokens. That the guy who owned it had his own tokens for money, and you couldn't leave the damn place because you couldn't exchange them for dollars. You were stuck there. That didn't really change till World War One, So, but they don't know that. Their history's been given through Hollywood. And as I say, through Hollywood, they all think they were free and wild and can make their own destinies and all the rest of it. It's utter rubbish. Yeah.
And it's funny you should mention the Dukes of Hazzard. I mean, I've actually seen some of those types of cars around here, the same paint jobs and everything, and presumably the same types of people driving them.
Or the wannabes, the wannabes.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly that culture here, that fast car culture. Kind of drive like a maniac. I mean, we hear sirens down on the big highway down here, and there's a lot of accidents around here on the interstates and stuff. And it's just atrocious driving. They drive like they're in a movie, and it's no wonder. It's no wonder people get hurt.
Live a fantasy that never really was. But what's true too. I mean, most ordinary people. And sociology proves it, and anthropology and all the rest of it, if you really study into it, most folk who lived in the rural areas in any country had to get on together pretty well for survival, purposes. You couldn't have the kind of real Wild West, as it's often portrayed, exciting and gunslingers and all the rest of it. You couldn't really have that because of the chaos, and those who could make things work would all leave to go somewhere else. So it's the same in ancient Rome too. The peasantry did the real work. They provided all your food and everything else, and they had their own customs and all the rest of it, which were kind of foreign to the elites, and they were pretty well a true, well-formed society. You'll find the same thing in most countries too. They didn't think about going off to war, and it's always the elite who want to go off to war to conquer and gain more and become more prosperous themselves for their own survival and progeny becoming wealthy down through time. That's never changed to the present day. But so the ordinary folk in every country have always managed to get on pretty well together. If you look at the history, often it's given, and through again fiction, of Scotland, for instance, you'd think that the clans were always slaughtering each other, which wasn't true at all, you know. And there was lots of intermarriage between the clans, went on all the time, and lots of cooperation as well. And they certainly had their own boundaries to an extent, but you didn't get slaughtered if you stepped over that imaginary line. Again, because England came over and dominated Scotland, and even when I say England, I also mean the Normans. You know, they kind of slipped in quietly into Scotland. You didn't have the big, massive battles that they did in England, but suddenly you had these lords would appear in Scotland, and they were really Norman extract, etc., and related to the ones who dominated England. And they changed the histories and made you, once again, made it seem like before they came, there was nothing but barbarism everywhere, utter nonsense. Scotland even was, ancient Romans used to send their elite children off to the universities in Scotland in ancient times. And most folk had no idea that even happened. They even had ones in Ireland, ancient Ireland, well documented too by the Romans and the Greeks as well. So there was an ancient culture that certainly was not, barefooted and all the rest of it, just managing the cows. It was definitely an educated class of the Celtic peoples.
So it's okay. Taking that as a fact. In terms of Hadrian's Wall, I mean, was that just a myth to make out that the Scots were just all savages? And had to keep them in?
No, they weren't savages. They were defending their country from invasion. And Rome, every country they went to invade it won, except Scotland. But that's the only country they couldn't conquer. And they went up to, there was Antonine as well, and then Hadrian. But the 9th Legion was sent up into Scotland, and Rome was in shock when it was found out that not one single one of them returned, and they couldn't find a trace of them. And then they sent the 13th Legion, and the same thing happened to them as well. And that's what made them build the wall. They realized they couldn't conquer these people. They were so fiercely defended their country, they wouldn't let it go. And they're very proud people. And they love their country. Scots have a great love of the land they're born on. You know, it's just incredible. And why would you hand it over to a bunch of folk who are going to turn you into slaves? You know?
Yeah, I just meant savages in the way it's always been portrayed. I didn't mean
that's what it's like. You think a bunch of hairy guys, you know, with clubs, utter nonsense. And as I say, that they had thriving ancient cities in places across Scotland too, and England as well.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, like, we're portrayed as savages, but obviously we're, as you say, just defending the country and defending it pretty well by the sounds of things.
Yeah.
At that point, the culture creation industry starts to portray Scotland as losers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from then we can't run our own country. We're not good enough to run our own country. Blah blah blah. All this kind of stuff. Our soccer team's rubbish. You know, all that stuff. And, it's just it's this kind of. I found it in Scottish people, maybe some of the lesser educated, shall we say, saying, "Oh well, you know, that's just Scottish for you. You know, that's just the way we are. You know, we're always going to be second. We're always going to be useless." Mm-hmm. And I find that's a mindset that seems to be, you know, kind of growing. If anything, this whole independence stuff is just farcical. Mm-hmm. You know, when people seem to have this defeatist attitude about everything. Of course,
what you have is a deculturalization process, and there's actually, I mean, even from the Romans up to the present time, there's techniques of, and they're using it, by the way, in the Middle East, in Iraq and so on. They send anthropologists in with all the troops, you know, that to find ways to work with the people there, but you start deculturalizing the people. The loser culture, loser patriotism, loser love of themselves, each other, and the country. That's standard as you knock a country down. Ireland and Scotland literally had the English language forced upon them by law, you know. And at certain times in Scottish history, if you spoke Gaelic, you were hung on the spot. You know, after Culloden that happened too. And you couldn't even wear your tartan eventually. That was your tribal. It was a nice damned outfit, you know. You couldn't wear that either. That was your attachment to all your ancestors and your whole history before you. That was all written in the codes of the tartan of your clan. You were forbidden to wear that too, or they'd kill you. With one exception, and the exception was, you could speak Gaelic and you'd wear the tartan if you fought for the English army abroad. You know, that's how they won Canada. You know, it was the Fraser Highlanders after Culloden they brought over. They faced either getting slaughtered or fighting for the English, and they won the Heights at Quebec. You know, so under Wolfe. So. That's all they've done ever since, has been the shock troops for the British Empire.
That's funny.
We've been deculturalized totally. Your history's been almost eradicated. You've been made to feel a second-class citizen. If you had a Scottish accent, you were definitely way down the rung on the class scale, as far as those in London were concerned. When you opened your mouth, didn't matter what your IQ was, if you opened your mouth, your accent would immediately categorize you in a certain class, and you were not deemed to get above it. You know, that's actual history. Yeah.
No, I mean, I remember that myself. The first time I was in London, standing at a bar trying to get served.
Yeah.
And as soon as they heard your accent, it just ignored you, and you were just left standing there. You just had to go somewhere else. But in terms of going back to the series Vikings, it's interesting. They landed first. They were in their own village, and of course they're portrayed as this big celebration because they're going off raiding. Mm-hmm. You know, all the women are shouting and cheering, and this is a great thing. So off they go, and they land in Wessex, and the English there don't speak English. They're speaking their own language. Northumbria has a different language, and nobody in England speaks English at that time.
That's right.
And all different dialects. When did that start changing?
Well, for a long time you had the Danelaw, remember, and the Danes really ran a good part of England for one time. Even before that, you had the Lords of the Isles that lived in the west coast of Scotland, who literally were part of the whole pre-Viking group. We don't realize the whole of Scandinavia and Scotland were attached in really ancient times, going into what was called prehistory. And they had often the Lord of the Isles, who lived in the west coast of Scotland, but in a castle there, were also ruled a good part of England. All the way down through Northumbria was part of Scotland for a long time. It was given away in marriage eventually of royalties. But they were also rulers of the Scandinavia as well, and it was quite acceptable from the Scandinavians' point of view that those people and those who were in Scotland were the same people to an extent, you know, to a good extent. So there's no nasty feelings about it. And sometimes ones in Scandinavia would rule good parts of Scotland and Ireland as well. They're all related, you know. So again, there's a long prehistory that goes into the history up until the early Catholic times. And again, the Catholicism as well tried to eradicate a lot of that as well, you know, the history.
Yeah.
So you always deculturalize by eradicating history. People don't even know that Scotland had a naval fleet. In fact, they sunk a Roman fleet off the east coast of Scotland.
Well, another thing that was portrayed in the Vikings thing was that I think it was Wessex and Northumbria came to an agreement with the Vikings that they would give them some land if they helped them as mercenaries to conquer Mercia. I don't know how true that is, but were the Vikings used as mercenaries in England?
Not so much, really, as the way it's portrayed. No, as I say, a lot of the Danes had settled in part of Wessex and so on, in parts of England, and they had the Danelaw there up until King Harold, you know, his days, and then they were conquered with the Normans, etc. and the Normans really changed the whole face of everything and kind of rewrote the history as well. There's no doubt that certain clan chiefs in the Norwegian side would also hire occasionally men either to a cousin somewhere over in, say, in Scotland or Ireland, and that's always been the way too. It's not so much mercenary. Well, your tribe would go off and fight for your cousin or whatever in different countries. That was their form of mercenary, I suppose. Scotland did it once in a while too, and in fact, there's even in towards the north of Italy today, you still get certain red-headed Italians on the north of Italy, because a tribe, one clan was sent over there to fight in a war, and they never got back, and for a long time they spoke Gaelic, and a lot of them still had Scottish surnames. So they were readily they were world travelers. We understand that they were world travelers in those days, and they didn't see the world as one tiny little localized place. They saw it to be explored, and they were really early explorers as well. So a lot of trade too came through Scotland and Ireland as well from different countries from ancient times as well, right up and again to the Normans came, and the Normans changed everything, including the versions of history. Lots of the history was burned in massive piles, basically, to eradicate the past. You always eradicate the past to dominate the people, and after a generation or two of indoctrination of the first generation, if you indoctrinate the first generation, they indoctrinate the children for you, and then you end up with this kind of vague nothingness of what the past was for you, where when everybody around you, or the one who's conquered and rules you, like London, for instance, dominates the world during an empire era, whereas you yourselves have nothing to look back on except eating haggis, and stuff like that. And that's all you get left with.
I do remember, like many years ago, wondering what it was to be Scottish anymore, because I couldn't see anything in Scotland that was Scottish anymore. Yeah. It was just this amalgamation of English cultures or things, and it was all kind of intermingled. There was no discerning thing. I mean, you had these guys standing on street corners with bagpipes, collecting money, and that was it. I just thought there's your culture just sold for 10p. Somebody throws it in a box, and I couldn't discern what it actually meant to be Scottish anymore.
Yeah, that was deliberate, absolutely deliberate, and it's very successful. We've been on for such a long time, and because we were put into a colony of London. London ruled. I don't even distinguish London. I do distinguish London from England, because they gave it, even the whole of England, a completely different culture as well. There's different groups across Yorkshire and so on that really were separate tribal peoples, very proud and separate from the rest, and eventually they went under as well. So it didn't just happen in Scotland. It was a uniformity that was created by a conquering army.
I suppose right up to the modern time, with the amount of mass immigration that's happened in England, that's gone completely now. Yeah. I think people in the south of England particularly must feel totally alienated at this point, and have no concept of what growing up in an English society would be, because that simply doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't, no.
Yeah. No. And the same as Scotland. Getting on to a country like Germany. We hear in the media that Germans should be apologetic for what happened in the Second World War and all this kind of stuff. And I've heard many times Germans say, "Well, hold on a minute, it's nothing to do with us. We weren't alive." So do you think there's something in the German psyche that's kind of fighting back, saying, "No, well, we're not having this"?
Well, they've had it so long. That's part of the problem. They've been living. A lot of people in Germany have been living a more substandard form of living because of the massive taxes to pay for reparations for World War II. In fact, they were still paying for World War One and II up until recently. They're still paying for World War II, and they were pretty well victimized to a great extent. I mean, we know for a fact that the groups that ran the English Empire eventually were called the Royal Institute for International Affairs, they planned future wars, and they planned a global society based on this domination of Britain that they've already done. They already dominate the whole world the same way. It's still going on now, of course, but they wrote in the 1800s, and Professor Carroll Quigley wrote about it in Anglo-American Establishment. He wrote about the fact that they started the Boer War. They wanted to take over the wealth and resources of Southern Africa, and they wanted to put under British rules. So the British armies would pay to keep all the gold and diamond mines safe for the private bunch, you see. And they wanted to do the same thing across the rest of the world, step by step by step. But since the Boer War, they were also agitating for World War I against Germany, because out of all the European nations that were allowed to go and create their own little empires, I mean, France had them, Holland had them, Britain certainly had lots of them. All the pink bits on the map were theirs, you see. And Germany tried to get into Africa too, did to an extent, but Britain was trying to keep them out because they didn't want Germans to compete, because the Germans were far too good when it came to competition and manufacture of products and raw resources they could sort of manufacture their products way better than they could elsewhere. They're very meticulous in their work, the Germans. And but the pride too, which a lot of countries lack, especially when you're dominated. You put no work, a real pride into your work when you're dominated. That happened in the Soviet era too, in the Soviet system. So those in London were afraid of the Germans, who are intelligent people. They could organize awfully well for administration purposes and run things awfully smoothly and efficiently. And they were a great threat to the other world merchandisers that had their bases in London, and so they wanted to put Germany down. So from the Boer War, the late 1800s, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, through all the papers they owned, which was pretty well all of them in England at that time, were propagandizing for war with Germany, which they got in 1914. You know, so this is an old-standing feud to put down someone who could outcompete those who already had competed and dominated a good part of the world.
Yeah, I mean it's been termed self-hatred, I guess, in Germany for what occurred over the past century or so. But do you think that? I mean, of course, the mass immigration has had a lot to do with it, I guess. But do you think there's an undercurrent in countries like Germany, who are a proud nation, and the people are proud, and they're always seen as a bit stuffy and no sense of humour and stuff like that? But they are industrious. They can take care of themselves. Do you think there's a sense there that things need to change for them, and maybe that's the kind of country that's going to kind of stand up and say, well, enough of this?
It could in time perhaps stand up. But again, I don't think there's enough time left, because the push is on now to eliminate pretty well all European cultures. It's a big push on right now to do the final push for all, and we're living through it right now. I was reading years ago the plans for the Middle East. I'd gone through the project for New American Century, published in the 90s, which took me into another guy was Henry Kissinger, of course, not just Brzezinski, but Kissinger himself had been at odds with Brzezinski to an extent about the plan to take out the list of countries which they have taken out in the Middle East. This was in the 90s, and take over all its resources and so on. But Brzezinski wanted the hard attack, basically, and that's why he supported, Bush and Obama and all that. Whereas Kissinger preferred a system of constant destabilization of those countries until they're completely non-functional. Then they could never stand up in a unified fashion anymore and fight in a unified fashion where they could win. If you're not unified, you aren't going to win. So you can really see what's happened, that Kissinger got his wish, because they have destabilized those countries. They get all the different factions which were stable under the great dictators that they had. Liked or disliked didn't matter. The fact is, these guys were strong-armed men who kept everybody in line, and they stopped them all slaughtering each other, and that they were first world cities basically that they've had there, So and they're all rubble today, and so they want them completely destabilized until they cannot unite for as long as they want, for a generation, 2 generations if need be, wherever. And so there's no problem at all, and that's what they want to do with Syria as well, because they were also on that list published by the Project for New American Century. And of course, we knew all the members of that too. Bush Jr. then, where they got the war kicked off quite successfully to take down those nations. So it's never stopped. They've got pretty well what they wanted, except for the last part of Syria and Iran. But they've got all the other countries knocked out, Libya and so on, destabilized, Stone Age, smashed, and living in poverty and chaos. So it's all done by the Western powers, and even a lot of the countries in the West are dominated by people who don't really see themselves as members of the countries they actually live in. So with the flooding of immigration, because again Kissinger mentioned that too, long before Kissinger, the Rockefellers and their foundation members put out books on destabilization of the world countries. First you go in and you bomb them, you create chaos. That creates them all fleeing refugees. You put them into the Western countries. They then mix in, destabilize the Western countries, and change the cultures until you have this mishmash of bits and pieces of different cultures. And once you've lost your pride as a nation, as a people, and let's be honest here, there's ethnic groups involved, and you cannot ignore ethnic groups. We've always had ethnic groups that really do exist. You can't just say certain people are allowed to be ethnics and the rest are not. That's nonsense. Everybody should be allowed to be ethnic. That's part of who you are. That's your history. That's who and what you are. If you don't know what your history is, you're like the American Indians who are drinking themselves to death and taking drugs and dying at an early age because you're completely deculturalized. That's what happens when you lose your whole history and your sense of purpose and those that came before you. So there's ethnic groups involved here. Some run the money system. Let's be honest about it. The Tates, if you run the money system, you can run the whole countries, including the very powerful ones, for your own ends. And you might want everyone else to mix together racially, which then eliminates what they claim are the more extreme forms of fighting back against conquest. And then you can be managed by another group, you see. That's part of the strategy that's going on right now. So once you're totally deculturalized, then it's finished. They'll all be alcoholics, drug addicts, or suicidal.
Yeah. I was thinking about Eastern Europe the other day, and all this carry-on that's going on with the immigration into Hungary, apparently through Serbia and all the rest of it. And a lot of these guys have got nothing to do with Syria. They're coming from all over the place and just using it as an excuse to get in. But in terms of like Eastern Europe, I'm thinking of Bulgaria again because that's the area I know most about. They have a large Muslim community there. I mean, we're getting off on a tangent, but it doesn't matter. But right across Bulgaria, there's many different ethnic groups. Mm-hmm. And I mean, the people in Bulgaria have a very kind of they've got a good sense of their own culture, but it's an old one. It's an old culture, and with all this happening now, I mean, I see this ending in absolute chaos and trouble. I don't know if that's what it's supposed to lead to, but the same old excuse will be given that well, we need the workers now because the best workers have gone off to Europe, which of course was all planned anyway. And I've heard you say before one of your broadcasts that in Poland they're trying to entice people back because they've no skilled labour there anymore. They've all gone. That's right. The country's fallen to bits. It's the same in Bulgaria. It's very hard to get really skilled workers there to do anything. And I can see this being used as an excuse, but it's going to just cause absolute chaos in those countries. And I don't know, are we going to see another Bosnian war type situation?
The U.S. has got a lot to do with the present-day Bosnia, and not Bosnia, Bulgaria, and places like that, because the West, the U.S. actually has been putting in missile bases in there for quite a few years now. They're quite happy to move the folk off the land. We also know that the EU system has more up its sleeve than just a bunch of politicians that want a collective Europe for the greater good and all that nonsense. They've been dishing out through, again, the International Monetary Fund, the central bank, millions and millions of dollars to these countries, but they're giving them to the corrupt guys in charge, and they know who they are, and they know that that's why they give them to them, knowing they'll put it to other uses, etc. They don't want it to go to the people in reality, but they put that money down on the tab of the country to get paid off as debt, you see. So everyone's under this yoke of massive debt. They don't see any infrastructure getting built out. All the money is getting supposedly lent to them. It's going to these crooks that are all in cahoots with the guys at the Commission of the EU Parliament. So they're doing a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on right now, which is very deliberate. At the very top, you don't keep giving money to the same people, like individuals in charge of certain parts of the country's infrastructure. You don't keep giving them billions of dollars, and they never account for it. Except nothing's ever done physically with it as far as building anything goes, or maintaining the roads or anything else, or getting the factories going. So why would you keep giving them the same? It's because they want to get the countries into massive debt. Eventually, a lot of these countries will be sold off to individuals, by the way, like Greece is. You know. There's no doubt about it. They're always selling their islands off and everything else. That's to happen everywhere else, too. We've got to understand the goals of the end of nations. You know, Von Rompuy said it himself, that the age of the nation state is over. But he and his group also published articles about the end of boundaries and borders of what were once called countries or nations. And certain parts are sold off to corporations. There's parts of England where oil is coming in, refineries and so on. That's been sold off to other foreign companies, you know, corporations outside the country, including the shoreline, you know. So you're going to see the divvying up of the world into private hands. This is what they want for this new super elite, which already does exist as far as financial ability goes, and you're going to bring in the common currency, of course. The whole history of the World Bank and the IMF and so on, all set up by the private group that ran London called Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the British Empire that they ruled, set up those institutions as well. They're all privately owned by their members, and they're used as a warfare strategy. Get the countries into massive debt, cause such a system of poverty while you're doing it that all the young folk immigrate out of the countries. Your countries really collapse once the young folk are out and they don't interbreed. But you can bring in foreigners, all come and go. Believe me, nobody wants to stay in those countries. They want to go to London or to the US or somewhere else. So they're only transient places. You can sell them off to private individuals, and you're back to a new feudal system. That's the whole key of it. That they want the world turned into this new feudalistic system where the proper people own the world, and you're back to the kind of peasant serf class that happens to live on it. You'll get bought and sold with the land. It sounds outrageous to an extent, but that's already happening. As I say, if you look at Greece, they've been selling off their islands and their ancient property that was owned by the nation and the people. They're selling them off. You know. So certain nations have actually bought them too. Israel bought one for an air base. You know. So that's going to happen across the whole world. The U.S. has done the same thing with its missile bases too, on the countries all around the Black Sea. So there's a lot of strategies going on right now as the folk make order out of chaos. It's their order, of course, to suit themselves.
Yeah, I know in Bulgaria that there's a lot of American bases there already. And in terms of corporations and private individuals buying up countries, the big corporations are moving into Bulgaria, Hungary, all those places, and buying up large tracts of land to grow their GM crops on, I guess. But in terms of going back to what we started with, the way culture's portrayed, I know in Bulgaria they have their own historical dramas, and generally all of them are about defeating the Ottomans. You know, and being winners as such. But there's two factions in Bulgaria, two main factions. You've got the royal family and you've got the military, and that's the two factions there. I don't know how it's going to pan out with the influx of Muslims into Bulgaria, but I mean, taking it as portrayed that the Muslims are always bad, And if you go down to the southeast of Bulgaria, I mean, they are relatively poor compared to the rest of the country there. I don't know. How do you think that will go?
Well, within I always look at circles within circles, and strategies within strategies. You understand that this is how the world really is run, by very full-time guys working in full-time think tanks, military and otherwise, and economic think tanks too, often together, of how to take down and run countries for the benefit of the few. And you'll find that you deculturalize the people, you get rid of their youth. Of course they're going to collapse as what they used to be. Their traditions will not be passed on to another generation of their own. Incomers don't care about your ancient traditions. They have their own customs, their own laws often too, and they'll go by their own laws and histories, and they have no affinity with anything that happened in your country, which they've moved into. That's why they're brought in en masse as well into Britain, etc. They all voted Labour, and Labour from Harold Wilson on was determined to flood the country with all different kinds of people of totally alien, and again, here's the key, was non-Christian countries. The more and massive studies were done in this for universities, the more diverse and opposite the cultures you could bring together, the more chaos it would create. Then you could recreate a new culture out of all that chaos. That's the whole key of it. That's the strategy. And they've been awfully successful with that until, again, people in Britain have no idea of pride or who they even are anymore, and they're told not to say certain things, or whole words and parts of history just disappear and aren't taught anymore, and you're deculturalized, and therefore you're owned by another group, and one group runs them all, and that's the economic group. Those who manage and lend out the cash, everything comes under that capstone at the top. Whole nations run on it. Politicians go cap in hand for more cash, and so believe you me, they're the winners of it all in the end, when no one's got any history or pride or anything else to stand up and fight for.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed, at the same time as all these historical dramas are coming out, you have all these futuristic ones at the same time. That kind of some of them are kind of geared towards giving you hope for the future, and other ones are kind of showing you that it's only going to be certain people that go forward and stuff. But there is no culture in any of them whatsoever. No. Everything's gone. It's just a group of people.
That's right.
That's it.
That's exactly right too. And the problem again with Bulgaria and other countries, again, circles within circles, you have this paid mercenary force. Let's be honest about it. We've got the whole history of ISIS, and who created them and who funded them from the beginning, and Al-Qaeda and all the rest of it. It's all from the U.S. side, not because the Americans want it, but those who rule America want it. And they use the American soldiers who are only too happy, it seems, to sign up and go off and fight these wars, which they don't even understand or care about. But they're the present-day cannon fodder. Before that, it was always the British folk that were cannon fodder. The ordinary British folk were cannon fodder for empires, and the U.S. took over from it, of course. But they're ruled by, again, another group who have their own world strategy on the go at the same time. So you can always move this mercenary force into any other country you want to, where you have peaceful Muslims, bring them inside. Next thing you know, all Muslims are going to be hated because here's this radical group who are really mercenaries, getting well paid, by the way, and funded and well armed and equipped still today from the West to destabilize any country they're told to go into, and that's happening too. Do you really think the combined forces of NATO and the massive weaponry and everything else they've got could not take out one group of people?
Well, absolutely not. And it's the same down at Cali, where we're supposed to have 5,000 immigrants storming the Eurotunnel. Well, if that was 5,000 football supporters, they'd be sorted out pretty quickly.
Absolutely. Another key too with all these massive immigration, Bangladeshis, everybody's on the bandwagon here. And believe you me, there are big organizations, well funded again from the West, who are organizing them all, giving them the cash and finances to get them all to come over. So, no, this is a warfare strategy going on, and it's awfully well organized indeed, and it's planned. And when the media are told to suddenly promote it all as a great thing, then this is part of the plan. Yeah.
Yeah, we've gone off into immigration and mainly, but I mean, it's incredible. I've driven through Serbia many times, and to believe that people are coming out of Greece and going the full length of Serbia to get to the Hungarian border and get in like that is just bizarre. It just couldn't happen. It just couldn't happen. I mean, you drive through Serbia, you're going to get stopped by a cop somewhere. That's just what happens to you. And there's so many toll roads and everything to go through. You just wouldn't make it from one end to the other without getting pulled over.
I mean, meanwhile, there were trains coming through all these countries that are getting clearance by the UN and everybody else. The thousands of them on, I mean, just one after another. That's all paid for in advance. And organised in advance. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I worked on one of those railways actually, putting the bridge over the Danube, the big European highways now, cutting right across and going into Serbia as well. But they've got all the stanchions up there for the roads that are to go in when they finally get in the European Union. But they were funded with European money before there was any talk of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
In terms of what I mean, we know kind of what the culture is going to be in the future, but I don't suppose you'd call it a culture as such, would you?
No, you will have a culture at the top for the elite. A kind of alien culture in its own right too, but for the rest of the people, now you have this mishmash of really amorphous, meaningless things. Actually, mental illness will definitely increase out of it. That always happens when you do this on a big scale. As folk get depressed and lose hope in everything and become nihilistic, that's what happens. And that's why it's true that, by the way, they're building up all the mental health institutions to prepare for all this stuff in advance, and all the drug industries are involved as well. They know all this has been planned a long time ago, and every battle plan has all of its fallouts of what's going to happen, how we take care of this and that and the other, and each think tank gets its own functions to specialize in an area. They've thought of all this way, way, way in advance. The public are always told it's just happening now, it's just spontaneous out of the blue and all that nonsense. No, this took years of planning, all this stuff.
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to say to the Bulgarian people when they have the immigrants and say that that they're taking all their jobs. Well, there's virtually no jobs there anyway for them to take, and so
well, they're going to simply again help. Again, what they do want is for those countries to then borrow more money from the European Central Bank, the IMF, and World Bank, and you get to a stage where they will declare, you're totally bankrupt. We now own you. And you're going to be serfs forever and ever, generation after whoever happens to be living, doesn't matter to them. You'll have no more nationality. You're just a bunch of serfs living in a substandard medieval system, basically. Yeah.
It's kind of like that there now, to be honest. Out in the countryside, there's virtually no work for anybody. Young people have no future. They've just got to live on the land as best they can, basically. I mean, I see some of the Roma gypsies running in and out of fields carrying watermelons and corn and stuff like that, and you can't blame them.
Yeah.
They've got to eat, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's going to break down into that more and more, and I guess we'll have the likes of Monsanto and DuPont and all these big agri companies having their own private little mercenary groups to guard their crops and stuff like that.
Well, they already have them.
Well, I mean, on the boots on the ground in Bulgaria, or maybe they'll just
well, they do, because Monsanto's in with the group with Blackwater and all the rest of them. They're actually not the same company.
They actually bought them, didn't they? Yeah. So I mean, I guess that's the way it's going, and as you said, people will be reduced to serfs, and it'll be food stamps for everybody, because that's all they'll be. That's all they'll be if you're lucky.
And you better be grateful for it, or else.
Yeah.
But they want a destabilized world to bring in a common world structure, a common governmental system, a common monetary system run by the World Bank. That's why it was set up, and the Bank for International Settlements. That's why they set that up a long time ago, which is run all of the money system of the entire planet through one system. And you have to create a massive chaos to make all that come about.
Yeah, and they're not going to be able to do all this without, I guess, massive depopulation somewhere down the line, because there'll be too many people fighting back, I guess. You will see
the time when literally, again, through the UN and its various organizations, you'll see food redistribution. You already have it to an extent, too. You can use pricing to do it by itself, not scarcity, or you can create what appears to be scarcity as you put it to other countries that seem to need it more. are more productive than you are, etc. You only see that across Europe, including Britain. One day you can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're already doing a calorie count.
Food's always been used as a weapon. And many years ago, it was a woman who was in charge of the United Nations Agricultural Department, and she said that food's always been used as a weapon by conquerors down through the ages, and it will be used again.
Yeah, I've heard you many times talk about how it'll come down to so many calories per person. And if you,
absolutely. You've got a present system right now where through the World Health Organization, it's telling you how much to eat, what not to eat, and all the rest of it. You will definitely go through a stage where, look at Scotland right now, it's a prime testing base for mental health from children. If there's any strange questions that they ask out of curiosity at the age of 2, it goes down in a report and they get readjusted, to make sure that we all live in ethnic harmony, etc. I'm not kidding you. That's going on right now. But also will come along your height, your weight, and so on as you grow up and throughout your entire life. That's going to happen one day, yeah. For everybody across the planet.
Yeah. I wonder what kind of TV programs will be putting out then about culture. There'll be none whatsoever to even remind people.
All you'll be taught that the world was in chaos because of competing ethnic groups and tribal rivalry, etc. That's all you'll be taught. And it was utter chaos and slaughter and awful and terrible. And now we've brought in civilization and new properly scientifically designed society with scientific indoctrinations and education and so on. And that's what we taught, yeah. And folk will believe it too.
Yeah, we'll probably get some remakes of H.G. Wells' Time Machine or something.
Yeah.
They'll be playing every Christmas instead of The Wizard of Oz.
That's it. Oh yeah, and then we'll have a sort of special day too when they'll declare